Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon for a webinar about the Climate4Cities tools. These tools and webinar are brought to you by the High Plains Regional Climate Center, Nebraska State Climate Office, University of Nebraska Public Policy Center, University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Community and Regional Planning Program, and the City of Lincoln. This was all made possible through funding through the NOAA Sectoral Applications Research Program. I am Natalie Umflett, the Regional Climatologist at the High Plains Regional Climate Center, and I'll be giving the webinar today. And behind the scenes, we have Martha Shulsky, who's the Nebraska State Climatologist. Other project partners are Zheng Hong Tang, Tarek Abdelmenem, and Frank Ularik. On today's webinar, we will be going over a brief background to help set the stage for this project. We'll be going over the project website, which includes climate reports that were produced specifically for cities across the region. We'll be talking about 4 web-based tools that we hope that you'll be able to use, and we'll be doing a live demonstration of these tools. We'll do a moderated question and answer session at the end, so please do write any questions you have in the chat box that's on the webinar panel. And if you do have any questions regards to logistics, maybe you're having a hard time hearing something, please do type those into the chat box and Martha will get back to you with some help on that. And this webinar will be recorded and posted to the project website, so if you need to step away, you missed part of it, or you'd like to share it with others, that will be possible. So let's get started. Here in the central US, we live in the land of extremes. And my guess is that for those of you on today, I don't need to tell you that. You experience that in your day-to-day lives with a wide range of weather conditions. And this region is exposed to a number of hazards like winter storms, severe storms, drought, and flooding. We know from experience that temperature and precipitation can vary quite a bit from year to year. And we can also see that across the region if we look at maps of annual temperature and precipitation. So you can see here with this map on the left-hand side, we have temperatures that range from very warm down in the southern regions to cooler up in the north. And then with the map on the right, we see that our average annual precipitation decreases as we move from east to west. So the further that we get from the Gulf of Mexico, the least precipitation that we get. Okay. We can also look at temperature and precipitation data through time for this region. We see lots of ups and downs. I bet that you can easily pick out the warmer and colder years, as you can see here with this temperature chart on the left. And you can also pick out the wetter periods and drier periods with this chart here on the right. Okay, and so we have in the purple the average temperature for each year from 1895 to present for the Missouri River Basin. And you can see lots of ups and downs. You can see probably pretty easily that there's also this tick up in the temperatures. And then on the right-hand side, with our precipitation for each year from 1895 to present for the Missouri Basin, see lots of ups and downs. You can see the Dust Bowl, you can see the dry years of the 1950s, and of course 2012. Right there as well. And even though we have this inherently variable climate in this region, we're starting to see changes through time in our temperature and precipitation. Okay, and so you can see here our temperatures are rising, our precipitation patterns are shifting. In these maps from the National Climate Assessment, we can see that temperatures have increased for much of the region, especially in the northern areas. And a lot of those changes we're seeing in the winter and the spring, and also for nighttime low temperatures, more than daytime highs. We can also see our precipitation increasing for much of the region, again for winter and spring for the most part. And as these changes, they come with impacts, and communities all across the United States are starting to plan with climate and climate change in mind. A lot of this planning we're starting to see in larger cities and also on the coasts. So the coasts are going to be impacted quite a bit from sea level rise, and so they're starting to plan for that. But there are people here in the central US that are also beginning to plan, and that leads us to where we are today. So back in about 2013, 2014, a group of cities with the Urban Sustainability Directors Network actually sought out funding so they could start to incorporate climate data and information into their plans. And they were located across this region through here. So the states of Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, Missouri, and Oklahoma. And this group reached out to local climatologists. So some of us here at the High Plains Regional Climate Center got to work on this. And we started to work on developing custom climate data and reports as a part of that project. And so it was that project that became the springboard by which we could start to learn more about how communities were using climate data and the ways that we could start incorporating that into planning. And so as a start, we conducted a survey just a few years ago, back in 2016, so that we could understand how communities are using climate data, what the barriers to that use were, what were the status of climate-related policies in the region, and then some attitudes towards climate change. And so I'm going to go over some of that real quick to just kind of set the stage for the tools that I'm going to show you today. So for this survey, we focused on states that were in the lower Missouri River Basin, and so that includes Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, and Nebraska. And we sent a paper copy of this survey to all 304 communities that had at least 5,000 people. And so you can see these communities in the map here on the right-hand side of the screen. And the purple dots show the metropolitan areas of at least 50,000 people. The blue dots show the micropolitan areas of 10 to 50,000 people. And finally, the green dots show smaller communities of 5 to 10,000 people. Okay, and so you can see the distribution of those communities across the region there. And of the 304 surveys that were sent out, 117 were returned for almost a 39% response rate, which is really good. And so some things that we found were that of those responding to the survey, about 60% were not currently using climate data and information for use in planning. That didn't necessarily mean they weren't using climate data. Maybe they were using it for utilities or for parks and recreation, but they weren't using it necessarily for the planning process, like long-term planning. And top reasons for not including this information included a lack of awareness about the value of using the information and a lack of best known practices in order to integrate that climate data into planning. We saw that as a good thing because those are some things that can be overcome. And we did also find through the survey that a report, webinar, or online resource with localized information specific to communities in the region could increase the use of climate data in planning efforts. And that is the part that we're going to be focusing on today. So these resources that were created for communities to help them in planning. And this kind of planning could be anything from hazard mitigation plans, emergency operation plans, comprehensive plans, or maybe a special specific climate adaptation plan for a location. And so I do want to note real quick that the resources that I'm going to show, they were created based on input not just from this survey, but also from focus groups on a workshop where we brought together folks from communities in this region, and also follow-up interviews and surveys so that we could start to incorporate their ideas into the tools. So we had that feedback process throughout the way. So first what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you some screenshots to provide a brief overview of the website itself, and then we will go online for the live demonstration. So here you can see the homepage for the website. It's located at hprcc.unl.edu/climate4cities. And the 4 is a number, it's not spelled out. And you can see that here in the little box. And this picture here depicts the Antelope Valley Project in downtown Lincoln. If anybody's been to Lincoln, you've probably seen that. And in the header, you can easily access lots of information about the project, along with the reports, tools, and resources. And here in the About tab, This is where you can learn more about the project. You can see publications, presentations, news articles. You can also find contact information for each member of the team. So if you had any specific questions that aren't addressed today, you could ask those of anyone on the team. In the City Reports tab, you can easily access any of the 11 city reports that were written for the project. And I will talk about those in more detail in a minute here, but you can see the list of cities that had reports written for them. So we had folks from Iowa, Kansas, Nebraska, and Missouri. In the City Data Explorer tab, this is where you can access any of the 4 tools that were built for the project, and that's what I'll be doing a live demo of today. And finally, we have a resources page, which contain links to all sorts of climate data information. So it could be for climate monitoring, climate outlooks, where to access climate data. There's lots of good resources there. And so, of course, today we're going to be focusing on these 2 sections, the city reports and the City Data Explorer. So here, if you were to hover over the City Reports tab, you'll see each of the available reports. In this case, maybe we want to look at the Springfield, Missouri report. And if I were to click on the link, I will be taken to the following page. And on this page, I can access the report, which is in a PDF format. I can also access all of the images that are in the report. And also, this is not just a Springfield, Missouri only page. If you scroll up and down, you can access any of the reports, or you can click on any of them from the tab as well. So in order to download the images, you can simply click there, and that will do a pop-up to download those. And then to download the report, you just click there. So very straightforward, very easy. And each report has the same look and feel, same table of contents. They're just customized for each individual location. And so each report contains historical temperature and precipitation trends, and this is going to be for a regional basis, statewide and local. So for regional, in this case, we mean the 4 states of the lower Missouri River Basin. So we're talking about, of course, Kansas, Iowa, Nebraska, and Missouri. And then we break that down to the individual state that the city is located in, and then on the local basis. And so each report is about 15 pages long. And in addition to these trends, we also go into local extremes, future climate projections, but not just the numbers. How do those future climate projections impact cities? So maybe in regards to water resources, energy, public health. And then, of course, there's also resources pages there as well. And some things I want to point out here, for our pilot project, we also had done a big report for the cities involved. That was with the Urban Sustainability Directors Network. And these reports were quite long and quite detailed. And we learned that making these in a way that were more written for a general audience, not just for scientists, is beneficial. We try to incorporate large images and nice colors as much as we could. And so with that in mind, I just wanted to draw your attention to what sort of analyses were done, because this is not just important to the reports. These are the same analyses that are done in the tools as well, so that we have those mirroring each other. And so all the analyses that were performed for the reports were based on the concerns of the communities in the region, okay? So for instance, you can take a look at snow and ice management down here at the bottom. Of course, this is very important for communities. People want to be safe on the roads in the winter, but there is a cost to that. So you have to have the plows, you have to have the equipment, you have to be able to buy the salt. And so understanding how snowfall might be changing is very important for communities in this region. One little tidbit, we won't have time to go through this in detail, but one thing that we learned through this project is for a lot of the communities in this region, snowfall is changing. We're getting less snow overall, so we're getting less snow in the fall, less snow in the spring. but we're getting more snow in the winter months. So if we look just specifically at December, January, and February, we are getting more snow in those months. And so knowing that information can help cities better plan for those types of operations, okay? And so just want to reiterate there, so what we did was we started off with the concerns of the communities, developed the thresholds that would be identified by so that the climatologists could then analyze those. And so as a part of the report, so I mentioned it was a 15-page report, which when it comes to scientific reports is a pretty short report. I would be happy to read something like that, but we all know that not everyone has time. And so each report also contains a full-page chart that shows just the basics. So how are each of the thresholds that we identified in that table changing over time? And these results are presented in an easy-to-read table. Here's an example here from Lincoln. And what this does is it shows each season and then how we have changes in the weather in those seasons. These are very quick and easy to read. They are color-coded. So for instance, for Lincoln, spring is getting warmer and drier, so you can see that warmer is in red. We don't have any cooler, so we don't have an example there, but that would be in blue. There are some communities that have a little bit cooling in certain seasons. And then of course with drier and wetter, we have those in the brown and the green. And then we have, if you have snowier winters, you have purple. And so what this does is it gives everyone a chance to start to learn about how climate may or may not be changing in your location. So for instance, if you have a mayor or city council member that has a short amount of time to go through something like this, they could read this in just a few minutes and at least get an idea of what the trends are like in their community. Now, having these reports are fantastic for the 11 communities that have them, but there's a lot of communities out there that need this kind of information. And so we are starting to wonder, how can we scale something like this report up to in a way that more cities could use them? And also for the 11 communities that have the reports, how do we keep their information fresh? We all know that once a report is written, it can go stale pretty quickly and just end up on a bookshelf. But how do we create tools that help them refresh those trends and then also help other communities in the region? So one thing we decided to do was make a suite of tools that could do that. And I just wanted to point out here, we did have a workshop back in 2017 that brought together folks from the communities in this region. And this particular community received a report and they said, I appreciate the data if nothing else, just to be able to have a frame of reference when they, meaning the council members, make tough decisions. I struggle trying to figure out how to ever quantify some of these things because it's too difficult for a city our size to try to come up with a report like this. Okay, so with that in mind, we were able to develop some of these tools to help scale up so that more people could use them. So I'm going to take you quickly through an overview of the tools, and then we will go live to demonstrate each one of those. Okay, and so this is further down on our homepage, and we have 4 different tools available. And so one looks at climate trends for historical climate. 2, look at future climate. And the last one, that helps you see how other communities are planning with climate-related issues in mind. And again, if you want to follow along or for the future, this is our URL here down at the bottom. All right, so this first tool, it's going to help you explore current climate trends at locations all across the Missouri Basin. And I should have mentioned there are over 800 locations that are included in the tools. And so these were pre-selected, so you can choose the most complete and long-term records available. So you actually don't have to sort through and try to figure out what stations would be good to use because these are already pre-selected for you. And so as you can see on this left-hand side, you can focus on one location. And in this example, I've got Garden City, Kansas. And I did just under a 30-year time period here from 1990 to 2017. And this is for springtime average temperature. And so we can see here the data is plotted in yellow on the chart. And we also have a trend line that goes through here. The nice thing about it is you don't have to actually download the data to get the trend. The program will actually calculate that for you, and you can see that down here at the bottom. Okay? You can also compare two locations at one time. And I think that this is really important because sometimes it's nice to see how your location compares to another. And especially when we're talking about things like precipitation, you could compare your trends to places upstream from you. And so in this example, we have Kansas City and Lincoln compared, and this is springtime total precipitation, also for just under 30 years worth of data. And you can see here that we've got Kansas City through time in the red, and we have Lincoln through time with the blue. You can also put the trend lines onto this graph, but just for this example, I decided to not put them on there, but I will show you how you can do that when we get to the live demo. Now for the second tool, what this will do is help you compare your current to your future normals. And some of you on here may not be familiar with what a normal is, but that's basically just a 30-year average for your temperature and precipitation, and these are updated every 10 years. So it's a standard way of thinking about climate. People use these time periods, these 30-year normals all over the world. And so right now what we're using is a 1981 to 2010 normals period. And so we can see here in this example, we've got current normals for Des Moines. And so in the green bars, we have our monthly average precipitation for that time period. We've got a very nice bell-shaped curve to that. And then also we've got our temperature. So in red, we've got our maximum temperature. In yellow, we've got average. And in blue, we have minimum. Okay, and this is just our monthly average temperatures for that 30-year time period. And what this does, it gives us a very quick look at our climate for a particular location. When you start to look at these for places all around the world, they'll all have different shapes. So not everyone would have this nice cold winter, hot summer type of temperatures. So if you're in a more of a tropical location, that might be more flat. But what you can do is that once you see kind of what your pattern is like, if you compare that to your normals that you might have in the future, you can start to see how that may be shifting. And what we've done is we've fixed the scales on each side so that you can make a direct comparison there. So in this particular example, we can see that our temperatures have increased and that our precipitation pattern has shifted just a little bit. So we've got a little bit of drying in the summertime, and we've got some more wetness there in the spring. And so when we go live to the tool, I'll show you how to do that. And I'll also show you the different types of scenarios that we have so that you're not just stuck with one, you can actually pick from two. But sometimes these numbers, they don't mean a whole lot. So a climatologist could tell you your summertime temperature is going to increase by 4 to 6 degrees. But what does that mean? Even as a climatologist, that's kind of hard for me to wrap my brain around. And so what we've also developed is what we call a sister city tool, which helps you conceptualize what these numbers mean, okay? And so what this does is it will match your potential future climate to a location that experiences those conditions today, okay? So again, we're talking about these normals, we're talking about these 30-year time periods. And so in this example, I chose Lincoln, Nebraska, and I'm looking at summer high temperatures. And right now, our average high temperature is just under 87 degrees. Under this particular scenario, it's showing us that by the end of the century, that could increase to about 95 degrees. So we can see this down here. Well, what is the closest location to us that has summer temperatures of 95 degrees? That happens to be Fort Worth, Texas. Okay, and so instead of just telling you the number, This is going to tell you the number and then also give you a location that experiences that, so you can start to think about what that might mean for your city. And then finally, we have a planning documents tool, and this will help you discover new planning strategies from other communities. And this is not just from communities in the lower Missouri Basin or just the Missouri Basin, but this is from communities all across the country. And it is not just a database of plans. Each plan has been categorized and indexed by different climate-related topics, so that you can be taken directly to the section that you want to see. We know that some of these plans are very long, some are hundreds of pages, and so it's very difficult to look through all of that when you're looking for one particular topic, and so we have done that hard work for you. All right, so now we will be taking a test drive through each of these tools. So first up, we will be going through the historical climate data and trends tool. And so this is one that will allow you to look at your historic trends for one location or two. So I'm just going to drag my browser over here, and so hopefully everybody can see that. And so this is what the tool looks like when you go to the page. And each of the tools are set up in the same way, where we have on the left-hand side, you'll make a number of selections. So this is where all your options are going to be. And then on the right-hand side, this is where your results are displayed. Okay? Also want to point out that on each tool, there is a how do I use this tool button, and this will pull up a tutorial that will take you step by step through these. Okay? So even if you don't watch the webinar recording in the future, we do have other resources available to help step you through it. So, okay, let's get started. First, what you want to do is select your state. And in this case, we're going to select Kansas. So we're going to do an example with Wichita. So I'm going to pick Kansas here, and that's going to load all of your stations into the select location box. And again, like I said, each of these locations has been pre-selected, so you might not see something right nearby, but chances are that's because it has a very short record or maybe an incomplete record. So if a station has only 5 or 10 years, we didn't include it. They need to have about 50 years or more worth of data. Okay, and so what we can do here is we can scroll through. These are just listed in alphabetical order. And I'm going to come all the way down here to the bottom, and I'm going to pick Wichita. And then once I do that selection, I can select my variables. And you can see a very large list has popped up here. And these correspond to all the variables that are in the table. So these are all the same sorts of analyses that were performed for the reports. And so in this particular case, I'm just going to take a look at average temperature. And now I can select my time frame. And so you can see here, you can pick from the different seasons. And these are the climatological seasons, so the full months are displayed here. Or you can pick annual. In this case, I'm just going to pick annual as an example. And then next, you can enter your year range. Okay, and so for this, you can enter anything that you'd like. If the station doesn't have particular years, that's okay. It's not going to plot those. I'm just going to put in 1969 for my start date and 2018 for my end date. And then you can decide if you would like a trend line through your chart. So you can see over here in the preloaded example, that's going to be your gray line through here. I will select that. And then you can check over your selections, make sure you have everything that you like. You click the Get Data and Trends button. It's going to think for a second. And there you go. In just a matter of a second or two, you now have your chart on the right-hand side of the screen. If for some reason you do not have a trend line, or if you've selected trend line and it's not displayed, it could be that there's a little bit of missing data in there. But for the most part, you should see a trend line played. If you want to save this graph, maybe you want to use it for a presentation or for a report, all you have to do is go to the little, I think this is called a hamburger menu, the little collapsed menu icon up here. You can click that, and you can see a number of options here. You can print the chart, or you can save it so that you can use it later. The graph is interactive. As I've been scrolling around the screen, you've probably already noticed that. But if you hover over individual points, you can see here I've got 1994's data. So in the yellow, the average annual temperature is 57.2 degrees. And then the gray, that's just showing us what our trend line number is there. Okay. And then you can also remove the trend line. Maybe you don't want to look at that. You can just click on it. So like I said, this is interactive, so you can click that on and off to put it back on or to remove it. And then also, even though you don't have to, if you want to see the data that's behind this chart, maybe you want to make your own customized chart, all you have to do here is click on the data buttons just above the chart. It will show you each year, in this case our annual average temperature. And if you scroll down to the bottom, there's a download CSV button. And so then you can go ahead and you can download that data if you would like to do that. Then to get back to the graph, you just simply click the trends button, and now you are back to your graph. Okay, so that is how we would look at trends for one location. But let's say that we want to add another location on top of this. And so we already have our first location selected. And now what we want to do is click on the Compare to Another Location button. So click that, and you'll see that there are some options that have now been come up. So just like before, we would select our state and then our location. So let's say that we want to compare the Wichita data to the Topeka data. So here I'm going to select Kansas. It's going to populate my list of stations, and then I'm going to scroll down all the way to Topeka. I can double check that all of my options are the way I want them. I can click the button, and now all of a sudden I have my results right there on the screen. And so in this case, we have Wichita in the red, so this part, and then we have Topeka in the blue. And just like before, if you want to save this graph, you can click on the little hamburger menu and you get your options. It is interactive, so if you scroll over, it's actually going to give you the data for both of the locations. So as we go through, and again, we can click these various features on and off. So maybe we want to look at Topeka by itself. We can simply click Wichita off of the chart. And the same here, we could take Topeka off. Okay, so lots of options there for looking at that. And again, just like for one station, we can also click on the Data tab, and we get the data for both locations. We can scroll down to the bottom. We can click on the Download CSV button, and you will get your data there as well. And so that is a quick run through of how to do the Historical Climate Data and Trends tool. So this one is pretty straightforward, I think. A lot of the options are probably similar to things that you have seen in the past, so no big surprises there. And so now what we're going to do is go on to the Future Projections tool. I'm going to access that from the header here on the screen, so our City Data Explorer. I'm going to go down to Projections, click that. And again, very similar to the way we had this before. On the left-hand side, we have our options. On the right-hand side, we have our results. And then we also have a tutorial here down on the lower left-hand side. How do I use this tool? And so what we're going to do here is we will do an example, and I'll show you how this is done. So first, we'll select our state, just like we did before. And I should have pointed out we do have, of course, all states that touch the Missouri River Basin. Okay, so if you're in Minnesota, if you're in Montana, Wyoming, all of these states are included along with the stations. Okay, so in this case, we're going to focus on Missouri, and that's going to pull up my list of stations here. And perhaps we're interested in Columbia. So I'm going to look at the Columbia Regional Airport here. And now the next option, so we can look at two different future scenarios, okay? And so if I click on this, you can see there's one called lower emissions, one called higher emissions. And so these are the same scenarios that were used in the National Climate Assessment. So we have the latest one that came out just last November. And there's a lot of information on these scenarios on their website if you want to learn a lot about it. But an easy way to think of these is in terms of looking at our range of possibilities, okay? So when we look at the lower emissions scenario, what this means is that we start to drastically cut emissions, which would help to lessen the impacts of climate change, okay? So we're gonna reduce emissions, we're gonna reduce warming, and so that's gonna give us more of a low-end range for our future possibilities. Now we also have on here the higher emissions, and you can think of this as more of a business as usual, so kind of the trajectory that we're on now in terms of emissions, and this is going to give us more of the higher end range of the different future scenarios. Of course, I do want to point out that that does not mean that this is the worst case scenario. You could potentially have worse, but this does give you a range from a lower to a higher end. And you know, that's really important for a place like the central US because we already have a very variable climate. And so we would want to try to plan for a range anyway, because with the climate change, our ranges are going to be changing through time. So this gives you an option to see either one. Okay, so in this case, we've got Missouri selected, Columbia, and I'm going to go ahead and do the higher emissions choice. And if you remember, we're looking at 30-year averages, so our current normals to projected normals. So you can look at these 30-year intervals in 10-year chunks into the future. So maybe we want to look through just before the end of the century. So not quite the end, but just before. So I'm going to click that. If you're happy with all of the things that you've put in, you can click on the View Projection button. And what that's going to do is it's going to pull up your current and future normals for Columbia, Missouri. And so what we can see here is that we have the current ones on the top and our future ones on the bottom. Same thing like I showed from the screenshots. We've got precipitation with our blue bars. We've got our average, max, and min temp in the yellow, red, and blue. And if you want to save your chart, just like in the historical climate data tool, you can click on that and you get the same options. You can do the same down below. And then it's also interactive, just like before. So you can scroll over, and this tells us that our current normals for Columbia for January, for instance, we're looking at just under 2 inches of precipitation for the month. And you can see the average, max, and min temperatures there. Okay, so you can do this for any of the months shown there. And if for some reason you don't want to look at precipitation, again, this is interactive. So you can click those on and off. If you want to focus on one particular variable, you can do that as well. Okay, and so what this is going to help you do is you can quickly compare in a visual way from the numbers what your potential averages for later on in the future could be, okay? And so you can see here the temperatures have increased. Like I said before, these scales are fixed so that you can visually compare them. And then you can also see how the precipitation has shifted as well. Okay, so we're looking at higher precipitation here in the spring, decreases here as we go through some of the summer, so you can see that comparatively. Just real quick as an example, we could click on lower emissions. You can view the projection. Just going to take a second there. And then you could compare that between the two. Okay, so you can dig into that quite a bit. You can play around with all the different time scales. And it can help give you an idea of how these averages could be changing through time. Okay, but like I said, these are the numbers, and sometimes that's hard to wrap your brain around, even as a climatologist. And so we will move on to our sister city tool, where we will help put some of that into context. And now this is going to be the tool that I know I really enjoy looking at this tool. It helps me get a better idea of what future conditions might be like. And so let's just step through an example to show how that's done. So again, set up just like the other tools, where we have our options here on the left. We have our output here on the right. You can also look at a tutorial down here by clicking on this. And so for this case, maybe what we'll do is we will look at Omaha, Nebraska. So we can click our state first. This again is going to preload our stations. We can scroll down to the Omaha Epley Airfield. We can select our variable, and so in this case so you'll notice we don't have the full suite of variables like we had for our climate reports. We just have a limited number of variables for our projections. And so in this case, maybe we want to look at our average temperatures, and let's keep the spring on there. So maybe we can look at spring average temperatures, although you could select from any of these options. In this case, we'll click on our higher emissions scenario. So again, that's like the business as usual. And then let's look at our current spring average temperatures. We'll compare those to the end of the century. And so now all you have to do is click on Find Sister City, and that's going to update this side here. We can zoom out, and here it's going to give us our location. So this is Omaha, and it's telling us that our spring average temperature by the end of the century would be similar to that of Joplin, Missouri. Okay, so you can see how far away that is there. Down below the map, we do have our current normal. It looks like we have a little error in our database right now. It's probably going to be, it's definitely lower than this one. I can look that up for you guys if you want to see that. I'll get that fixed shortly after the webinar. But this shows you that the projected normal, so this is going to be our spring average temperature, is looking at increasing to about 58 degrees. And you can see here that the current normal for Joplin is 58.1. Okay, so that did a pretty good match there. And so what you can do is you can go through the various variables here. You can select your different time frames. You can select your different projection scenarios, and you can compare that in 30-year intervals as we go out to the future. So if we wanted to, we could look at how this compares to a lower emissions scenario. So again, this is spring average temperature. This is looking out towards the end of the century. So our higher emissions scenario puts us at Joplin. Our lower emissions scenario puts us more like Kansas City. Okay, so you can see how that would not be as warm. You can see that's more of about 55 degrees instead of the 58. Okay. So pretty straightforward tool there. And then last, what we're going to do is go through the planning documents tool. And even though this is probably the least climate related tool of the group, this is the one that I really like a lot. And so what you can do here is you can select a topic on the left hand side, or you can just select a plan if you're interested in looking at the whole plan. And then on the right hand side, it's going to pop out just those plans that have the topic that you selected. So just like the other tools, we have our selection box on the left, our output on the right. We also have a very short tutorial on this as well. Okay, so maybe what we want to do is, let's say we are interested in energy conservation. And so we can go through here and look at the topics. So we have different topics that we pulled from the plans. So you can do air quality, climate change. ecosystems and wildlife, energy conservation, green streets. Some plans specifically address greenhouse gas emissions. We have a number of hazards, okay? So we do have several hazard mitigation plans that are in our database, and so you can check out those there. We have recycling, renewable energy, stormwater and watershed management, sustainable infrastructure, urban forestry, and water quality, okay? So let's take a look at energy conservation, and that's going to pull up all the plans that are in our database that have that specifically addressed, okay? And so we have 18 different plans in the database. You can see some of these here. So we've got Minneapolis, Austin, Boulder, Lincoln. We've got St. Louis Park, that's a suburb of Minneapolis. We've got a county level plan from Washington. We've got Cedar Rapids, Missoula, Omaha, Chicago. So maybe we want to look at the energy conservation section for Cedar Rapids, okay? And so what this is going to do is not only does it tell you the report, it's going to tell you the section and the pages. You don't have to actually memorize that, because once you pull this up, it takes you exactly to that page that you're looking for, okay? So we want to read about energy conservation. This takes us exactly to page 107, and the next few pages then tell us about how Cedar Rapids wants to lead in energy conservation and innovation, okay? So very easy. You didn't have to read all 100 some odd pages to get to that section. We can go back to the Climate4Cities page. And so again, if you wanted to look at a whole plan, of course these pull up the whole plans here, but you don't have to go searching for it. You can see each of the plans that are included. Okay, so some of these are hazard mitigation plans, emergency operation plans, comprehensive plans. And so we could just click on one here. Maybe we want Missoula, Montana. And so my pop-up blocker is blocking it, but we could, maybe we'll do this. We'll allow it. This might happen to some of you. So let's try that again. You can click on Columbia. It's going to pull up an emergency operations plan for Columbia, Boone County. Okay, and so then you could read the whole entire report there. All right, so that's going to conclude the live portion of the session. So I'm just going to drag this off of here and go back to the presentation. And so this just has all the links to those tools like we had there. I did want to share with you a little bit. So when we prototyped these tools, we did ask for feedback, and we had some folks test them and tell us how they might use these tools in their cities. And we had some really positive responses. We were able to incorporate a lot of suggestions into these tools to help them work better. And we learned that folks were going to potentially use these tools for planning, use them to help communicate how climate is impacting their cities, and then also to help to validate decisions that they're making. And so there's a lot of different ways that these tools could be used. Of course, it doesn't have to be used in cities. These are locations throughout the region, and they could be used for a number of sectors as well. And so with that, Martha will be checking out the chat box and looking at questions that you might have. So thank you again for joining us today. Really appreciate you being on this nice Friday afternoon. And if you have a question that you don't get into the chat box, please do feel free to reach out to us at any time. We would be happy to answer your question or work with you on any of your climate data needs. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you, Natalie. That was a great overview of the tool suite that we have here. So again, as Natalie mentioned, just please feel free to type any questions you might have into the chat box, and I'd be happy to read them aloud, and we'll get those answered. I'm not seeing any so far, Natalie. It looks like you've done a great job at describing these. I wonder if you could perhaps leave it on a slide that lists the website URL with it, just in case people didn't write that down or want to look at that again.
Sure. Yeah, I can go back. Let's go back here to, this is just a screenshot of the homepage, and that's the URL right there that will take you to the homepage, and you can access all the different tools that we hit on today.
Perfect. Thank you.
Well, with that, I guess we will end the webinar. So thank you again for...
Natalie?
Oh, do we have a question come in?
Yeah, we do have a question coming in.
All right.
So yes, great question here. So are there future plans to enhance this tool is the question.
Oh, that's a great question. Yes, so these tools are hot off the press. They were released to the wild just earlier this year. I believe in late March, early April is when these went live. And so we will be gathering feedback on these tools as we go along. And we would be happy to incorporate and enhance these in the future. For now, they probably won't change too much since they're very new, but it would be great to see these grow in the future. So thank you for that question.
Great. Anything else? Looks like we don't have anything, Natalie, so I guess we could go ahead and close out. And yeah, as Natalie mentioned, this webinar was recorded, and so it's going to be posted on the URL that you see there. So if you missed something, or if you'd like to send this to somebody who did not make the webinar, then please feel free to distribute as you see fit. Thanks, everyone, and have a great summer.